Alright guys, so today what we're going to do is introduce interval notation to you. And as you can see right here, we have our interval notation right here. Now, before we can get started, I want to make sure that we understand that this is all going to be on the x scale, because when we look at our graph goes from left to right, which is going to be the x-axis. This is going to be the start of our talk or discussion of domain and range. So if you'll notice, on all three columns, they all start off with -3, -3, and -3. And over here on the other side, we have 5, 5, and 5. Now, what we need to do is understand what the different symbols mean and know that they all stand for the same thing. So starting off with this -3 here, if you look, you see the difference in circles. We have an open circle on this side, and then we have a closed circle on this side. And to go with that, we have this bracket on the -3 and a parentheses on the 5. And likewise, we have less than or equal to on the 3, and then we have the less than sign on the 5. So what we know is that when we have a closed circle, that means that we have an inclusive number. So in other words, that means I'm actually equaling the -3 on this, because the circle is on -3, it's closed. Whereas over here, it's not going to equal 5, but it's going to get so close to 5 that graphically I have to put a dot on the 5. But the open circle lets me know that my closest number can be something like 4.99. Can I graph that? Not really, so that's why I go ahead and put the circle on 5. And if you'll notice over here on the inequality notation, that's what these are, these little greater than and less than signs, inequalities. What you'll notice on the inequality sign is that this has the or equal to sign underneath it, which is why the -3 over here is a closed circle. So understanding those two, we look at here and we realize that the bracket is inclusive. In other words, we know that we equal the -3. So if I have a less than or equal to sign, it's the same thing as a bracket, and it's the same thing as a closed circle or a solid circle. And so if I have a less than sign, we know that it's the same thing as a parentheses, and that's the same thing as an open circle. You guys might want to keep this in a note somewhere to help you remind yourself while you're going through this. And that's a good key to have. So let's go ahead and look at this next example over here. If you'll notice, the open circle is on the 2 for the graph, which is why I have a parentheses on the 2 over here. And that's why I only have the greater than sign on the 2 over here instead of a greater than or equal to, because I have a closed circle. Now, you'll notice that this is actually kind of flipped the way it's written, and whenever I do inequality notation, I always want to take the least value and on this column, and then the greatest value on this column. So let me go ahead and cross this guy out and kind of explain what I mean by that. I put the variable that I'm actually using. So in this case, we're using the x-axis, which is why all of these will have x in them. So I have an x right here, and I know that my smallest number is the 2, which is why I do less than 2 over here. Now, if you'll remember, this was actually flipped, and we'll come back to that here in a minute. Now, what we see is that this graph, it continues on and it has a big solid arrow, which is why when I look over here at interval notation, it tells me that I have this infinity sign, because it just continues to go in this direction forever. And so it goes until I reach positive infinity. Now, you might be wondering, why is it that I have a parentheses and not a bracket here? Well, the reason is I can never actually equal the value of infinity, because as soon as I reach that number, I've gone and I can go to a bigger number, right? So infinity just stands for a really big number. So as this graph continues to move, you keep getting bigger and bigger. So therefore, I can never have this actually equal to infinity. So infinities will always get a parentheses, and over here, if I do it graphic or on the inequality, I could put less than infinity. If you notice, you have the -3, the -3, and then the 5 on the right, and the 5 on the right here. But really, in math, it's kind of redundant to put that infinity sign, which is why you'll never actually see it on any of your answers if you were to take a test. And if you look, the alligator is still eating the X, right? And here the alligator is eating the X as well. So if I do put the smallest value in the left-hand side and the greatest value on the right-hand side, to make this look the same way, all I have to do is flip the problem. So let's do a couple of these problems together as an example. So here I know that X is going to be smaller than or equal to 3. So if I were to, it's always best to do the graph first, or at least for me, because it helps me find my answers a little quicker. So put a 0 down and then put a 3 somewhere in there, right? And since I have a less than or equal to sign, and I can come back up here to my key, I notice that it's going to tell me to do a closed circle, right? So I do a closed circle. Now the next question is, which direction does it go in? It says that X is smaller than 3. Well, is -10 or +10 smaller than 3? And you'll find that -10 is. Now, because there's nothing else on the restriction, it just keeps going in that direction. So when I draw, here, I'll use some different colors there. So when I draw it, I draw my line going this way, and then I put another arrow on top of the arrow that's already there. So you'll see that this graph actually goes all the way out to -infinity out here. -infinity. So when I do my interval notation, you always do the smallest value here and the greatest value over here. So the smallest value between -infinity and +3 is -infinity, and then +3. Whoops, what do you guys notice is wrong? Because this is a closed circle, I have to put what? A bracket, okay? Alright, so let's do one more together. Let me pick a little more difficult one. Let's see. Now number 6 is split up into two pieces. You see how it says or? So if I were to draw a graph of this, like such, I would have, okay, I'm going to put my 0 down, put my 1 down, and then my 5 down. Okay, because I have those two numbers. Now, graphically, this says 1 is smaller than or less than 1. And since it's just less than, that means I put an open circle because I don't actually equal that point. And so it says that the number is smaller than 1, and I know that 0 is smaller than 1, so I know I have to go in the left-hand direction. So here, let me draw an open circle, and then there it goes in that direction. Alright, now the next one says that I'm greater than or equal to. Or equal to is the key here. Close up the circle because it's equal to. Now it says that anything that X is bigger than 5. So I know that 10 is bigger than 5, so I know I have to go in that direction. So come back to the interval notation. I'm actually going to have two sets here because the smallest value that I start with is negative infinity. The greatest value on this line is positive 1, so I put the 1. Because it's an open circle, I put parentheses. The next smallest number is 5. Because it's a closed circle, I put in a bracket. And then the next greatest value, because it goes on forever, is positive infinity. And infinity always gets the parentheses. So in short, it always goes smallest number, comma, largest number, and then depending on what I have, depends on whether I have a bracket or a parentheses or a bracket. Okay? Brackets mean equal to. This means not equal to, or open circle. Not equal, equal. Okay? And then same thing with the inequality notation. It always goes smallest value, less than, and it depends on which axis I'm looking at. Because all of these are going left to right, it's the x-axis, which is why the middle number here is going to be x. And so always smallest to largest. Because if I did it the other way, the alligator would be eating the smaller number if I switch these two around. So there you go. Alright, and just as a recap, we have less than or equal to is the same thing as a bracket, is the same thing as a closed circle. And less than is the same as parentheses, is the same as an open circle. And so my templates for inequality notation, is going to be smallest value, less than or equal to the variable I'm using, x, less than or equal to or less than the largest number. And so interval notation will do the same thing. Smallest value, largest value. Remember, parentheses is the same as less than or equal to is the same as my bracket. And so on a number line, that would be an open circle with my smallest number, with a closed circle on my largest number. Infinities, positive or negative, always get less than or the parentheses. Okay? So, happy hunting.